So just real quick, just because everybody keeps asking the obvious, right? Coronavirus. I thought that I would just explain it to everybody at once, and so that we're all on the same page. Number one, with what's happening in reality, and number two, so that you guys knew what we were going to do about it. And so the deal is, so I get a bunch of feedback through the American Medical Association, and they send all this stuff out to doctors through physician links, so that the doctors are better at understanding the management, how to explain to patients and stuff. So the stuff I'm giving you is just stuff I just read off the links I get. And basically, I think that the big scale of where it is when it first started, we all said it's just like the flu virus, and it is, for the most part. It's a virus that's been around before, okay? So coronavirus is not a new virus, it's been around. This form of it is new. And in fact, when they name it, novel COVID-19, you guys have seen that? All that stands for novel is new. CO for the COVID part of it is corona. VI for the vid part of it is virus. And D is disease. And 19 is the first year it was discovered. So that's COVID-19. Okay? There's not anything special about that other than that's how they label things so that we all know and understand when they come about. You guys all know the basic stuff, right? It started in animals. At first they said a camel, then they said a bat. And that's how a lot of viruses start. And in fact, I'll jump way ahead. One of the things you probably should know for those of you who have animals is that they don't know yet with COVID-19 if it can be harbored in the animal at this point. So it still might be able to be harbored in an animal. And if it is, you could basically, your pet could be carrying it around for you as well. That's kind of up in the air yet. They don't have any pet people transmission cases yet, but that hasn't been defined. There are person-to-person transmissions. At first there weren't, now there are. And as far as transmission goes, the most common way of transmission, everybody's into the whole, wipe every surface down, be careful. That's probably a small percent of the transmissions. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't do that. You still should wash your hands, wipe down every surface, do everything right. But the great majority of transmissions are going to be respiratory-wise, okay? And what it is that when you sneeze or cough, for example, a bunch of small particles come out of you. And sometimes if you've ever seen somebody in a car talking and the sun's hitting them just right, it looks like they're spitting. That's really how we all are talking all the time. It looks that way. But if the sun or the light's hitting just right, you'll see it and you'll go, wow, that person's kind of spitting. Well, we all do that. When you sneeze or cough, particles come out of your mouth at like 400 miles per hour. They travel 6 to 12 feet. And there's a bunch of the bigger ones you see that kind of fall to the ground or the surfaces. That's all the surface stuff you're hearing about. The rest of the particles are very, very small, microparticles. Smaller than the tip of a hair. And they will float around, like another example is, have you ever seen, we're watching through sunlight, you see a particle of dust kind of floating? It's really not going anywhere, but it's just kind of floating. They do that. And that's how most of this transmission is occurring, because it'll stay in the air. And there's various times that you'll hear, but 4 to 8 hours potentially, because little whiffs will pick it up and keep it floating. So you can inhale those particles, and that's how we're getting infected a lot, is respiratory-wise. So what that means, and so continue to wipe down surfaces, continue to use, when you do wipe down surfaces or use stuff on your hands, greater than 60% alcohol-containing base product is the best, okay? But remember that that's probably not the big way you're gonna get it. Big way you're gonna get it is somebody coughs here, and then you walk by an hour and a half later, and you go, and you take in a bunch of particles. That's why it's so easy to get out and about. So what they do, that's why the biggest risks for transmission are when you get a bunch of people together in a confined space and there's no recirculating air. So like stadiums, put in 20,000 people, 30,000 people, 5,000 of them are coughing, it's all going out in the air, it's mixing all around, the air's not really moving it anywhere. That becomes a very high risk. That's why they're canceling state basketball tournaments, canceling NCAA tournaments. Confined spaces, a bunch of people and such. So, airplanes are probably a pretty big risk. Any of those confined places with lots of people are a big risk. It's mostly respiratory, okay? Now, the virus itself is, everybody's getting it, so it's spreading easily. And that's why it's a pandemic, okay? The difference between epidemics and pandemics, right? Epidemics are a bunch of people getting something more localized. Pandemics are a bunch of people getting stuff everywhere. It spreads very, very easily, so it's easy to get. That makes the overall numbers of death from it seem a lot higher. It makes it seem a lot more deadly than maybe it otherwise is. Now, from what I've seen, probably the most reliable things are probably like 0.3% of everybody that gets the flu dies, and about 1% so far of everybody get this virus dies. So It seems to be a little bit more, but what's making it scarier is just that so many more people are getting it. Okay, so who dies? Not people like us, typically. Okay, I'm not saying we can't, but it'll be very rare. Most of the people that die from the virus are diabetic, elderly, underlying respiratory condition, immune compromised in some way, or on an immune compromising medicine. And it can be kind of simple things that you don't think about. So for example, an MS patient who's on a bunch of steroids is really immune compromised. Someone with really advanced arthritis who might be on, some of the autoimmune drugs, Imurans, these really strong, hard drugs that kind of keep their arthritis check, might be compromised. Most of the people we'll see, though, will be elderly, kind of diabetic, and with respiratory problems. So a really deadly person for this disease would be a 65-year-old with COPD. Okay, or you have underlying lung disease, you've been smoking a lot, you'd be at high risk. Yes?
What about like people with asthma?
Asthma would be a higher risk, but not as high as some of those others. And when you think about, and that's where people at first were saying, hey, this is kind of a lot like the flu. A lot of people with the flu, a lot of people die from the flu, right? I mean, a lot of people die, the number I've used recently on something, 18,000 people a year die from GI bleeds related to aspirin. Okay, so there's a lot of deaths in certain categories. We all take aspirin when thinking anything of it, right? Same thing with stuff like flu. I had it this year, probably many of you had it, and we don't think we're going to die from it. There are a certain group of people, though, that have a particular area it hits, and COVID-19 seems to, one of those big things seems to be a respiratory effect. So an asthmatic child, for example, would be at higher risk than just a child. Okay. So that's the basics of kind of the disease and the spread and what we need to think about in those regards, what we can kind of educate people on. It is, it's definitely something that, do I think that we're probably going to get it, or some of us are going to get it? I do. Okay, it just spreads too easily not to. Some of you may already be infected from walking into a King Soopers to go buy toilet paper, and you've already inhaled some droplets from the guy that was coughing walking down the aisle. And that doesn't worry me that we're going to get it. What worries me then is how we kind of stop the spread of it. Now, as things get warmer, viruses don't tend to do well in warm weather, and so nothing really does for that matter, right? That's why when you sterilize stuff, of course, you heat it up and such. Now, I'm not saying that kills everything, but one of the reasons that we have flu outbreaks that start in October and they don't start in June is temperature and climate related. So good thing is we're heading into a favorable time from that perspective, but we still have a couple months to go. Okay. I also think the numbers you see now are going to astronomically increase in the next 3 to 4 weeks. So right now, not everybody's getting tested, and we don't have enough test kits, and doctors are real stringent on the protocol for testing because, for example, when people come in for care, you don't do anything special for them. There's not a coronavirus medicine. There's not something you can take prophylactically. You treat symptomatically. So when people come in, you go, what can I do for this person's symptoms, right? The shorter breath, give them a nebulized treatment there. The heart rate's fast, slow it down, blah, blah, blah. So long story short, because there's no specific treatment, some doctors are saying, look, you're a 25-year-old healthy male with a fever. Could be coronavirus, could be flu. I don't really care because I'm not going to do anything about it. So that was some of the early kind of medical opinions and why doctors were approaching how they were approaching it, because they're not going to do anything special. So people were under-tested, and then when they started to kind of test to get numbers, and so why would you test it? So why would you test? Well, you test it because you want to find out where that kind of the breakout centers are, so you can stop those people and keep them in a location, right? Because then you can stop further breakouts. So that's a reason to test, but there's really not like on the treatment end, there's not a lot it's going to change. So they were under testing, and then when they started testing, there weren't enough test kits, basically. So then they set a criteria. The Department of Health, I believe, set a criteria that said, okay, they traveled to a foreign country, and they're like immune compromised with a fever or something like that, or they've been in touch with somebody that traveled to another country, they can be tested. But nobody else can. That was the initial criteria that was sent out. So now, all of a sudden, it gets all this national attention. Federal government puts, $8.5 billion into it. Everything's getting shut down. They're going to start testing everybody. You guys are going to see these numbers skyrocket, okay? Like right now, as of 2 days ago on the 11th when I last checked, there were 1,215 cases. I just went and double checked the number. In one day, we had 400 new reported cases, okay? That is, a third of what we had the entire time in a day. So I think you'll probably see this number go like 1,200, 1,600, 16,000. It's going to go nuts. So over the next 2 to 3 weeks, don't be surprised when you hear outrageous numbers greater than 100,000 people positive. It wouldn't surprise me at all. and that's just to be expected. It's from testing more attention, more vigilance, and as I said, I'm sure some of us will be in that group as well.
Joe, if they have the virus identified, why can't they do a vaccine like you do for the flu? I mean, they always say flu doesn't cover everything because there's so many viruses.
Yeah, they do, and they're actively working on vaccines. Probably the shortest process or time period to get a vaccination now is about 3 months, and probably the longest term is probably about a year. So I have no doubt that this time next year, we'll actually next September, October, when you guys get your flu shot, you'll be getting your COVID shot. But for this year, by the time they get it out, we'll be in the summer months, and the numbers will already be coming down. So while they're trying to get it out, while it's not a bad idea to get it out, I don't think we'll have one in time to be effective enough to stop or help anything. Like, we need it now.
Because it has to be before somebody is.
Yeah, before the exposure. Because basically how that system works is when you get vaccinated, you get almost like a weakened form, so that your body can build up an immune process where you kind of get barely sick, but not all the way sick. And you build up this immune process to it so that when the real illness hits, it just fights it off immediately. And that's how that, kind of a simplified way of looking at how vaccination works. And so you have to really do it in people who don't have the disease, with a weakened form of the disease, and allow them to develop an immunity to the disease. And then what happens every year is there are these little shifts that occur within the disease. It'll change one little part of its genetic makeup, and then the vaccination you have against it is no longer any good. So it looks like you, but with a scar on your face. All of a sudden, facial recognition, if it didn't work because you all of a sudden had a scar, that's kind of like how the disease is. All of a sudden it changes one little thing, and you call them antigenic shifts. There's these little shifts that occur, and they make it not good anymore. And so even by the time next year comes, there'll probably be some shifts in this current one we're seeing where it'll shift just a little bit, and then what they make won't be useful.
Weren't they saying in China where it started and it's kind of stopped there, that they've kind of they've controlled it there?
The numbers, yeah, it's one of the places where the numbers are actually going down now, which is good. But they put in all of these processes like we're now doing here, and that stops spread, right? All the quarantining of people, stopping travel, all those things. It sounds crazy that the president stops airplanes from Europe from flying over. It's really not. That's how you have to literally kind of stop things in its place and put things in their box. That's why when they find a bunch of people who are sick, they put them all in the same place, right? Because you've kind of put them in a box then. And that's how you stop, processes like this. So if you look here in the United States, for example, the highest number of infected people in the United States was in California and New York. They were the high end, and so there's a lot of risk there. And this is as of a couple days ago. Colorado fell in kind of a medium zone risk, and then we had places like I think it was Wyoming, North Dakota, Alabama, Mississippi. They had no reported cases as of 2 days ago. Now, as I understand, the last 48 hours, of course, they've started to pick up cases too. But that's part of that ramping up I'm telling you about. So there's no doubt it's going to hit every state. It's going to hit everywhere. But it's so contagious that, for example, they had one group of people, I believe it was in Aspen, where there were 14 people that had been in a house together. 9 of the 13 agreed to be, of the 13, 10 agreed to be tested other than the sick person. 3 of them said, I'm not getting tested. Of the 10 that tested, 9 were positive. So it spreads like that. Right? It's pretty easy to get. So
no telling how long it'll run its course?
My guess is that you'll see, no, there's no telling how long, but my guess is you'll see it peak over the next 3 weeks, 3 to 4 weeks, and then we'll start down as well. And you see all this stuff happening, right? Canceling high schools, canceling all stuff. That's all stopping a lot of the spread.
And how long does it usually make a person sick? Like if they get it at, 2 weeks?
So the course of it runs anywhere from 6 to 14 days. They find that the real severe illness part for respiratory stuff is usually at about day 6 to 8, and it's a whole spectrum. So some people get it and are asymptomatic, like you got a little cough, a little burn your eyes, you feel a little bit warm, and then you start to get better over a couple of days. You may have actually had it. And then there's other people who get it and they get sick as hell, and day 8 they're in respiratory failure on a ventilator, and it's just different. For it's not one that's like the exact same, but if you just want to kind of put it in a box, you're looking at 6 to 14 days. You're looking at the deadly days being day 6 to 8, and respiratory being the reason.
How do we, let's say one of us gets it, how do we protect our own families at home from getting it from us?
It's going to be close to impossible.
That's what I figured.
Yeah, because in your home, again, you put yourself back in that enclosed box, tight space, close contact, in the air. It's going to be close to impossible. You could use all the same precautions of surfaces and masks and try not to breathe.
My wife will kick me out to a hotel. That's where I'll end up.
It's really.
Yeah, exactly.
It's going to be really tough and things like that. So far, at first they were saying, well, kids were more susceptible or were at higher risk, and they're not. That hasn't panned out. Kids are doing actually very well, and it's really just elderly, immunocompromised people that are kind of suffering. And like anything, it can hit anybody. I had a 39-year-old brother-in-law, as you guys know, about 5 years ago. It was very tragic, and our family died of the flu. Right, just so you never know. There are the you never know cases, but for the most part, generalizing, very, very few people will die compared to how many get infected, and the ones who do die on average you'll be able to somewhat predict. Yeah.
So on that same topic, Brian, how would I protect my mom who is diabetic and still disease, very ill all the time, other than keep her in her own house and lock her up? Her husband works
That's about it.
Her husband works at a hospital, so should we move her somewhere else, or is she?
Literally, to protect somebody like that, you almost have to put them on an island, because if she goes out to a public place, her risk goes up.
Right.
If her husband goes out to public places and comes home, without spraying him down in complete decontamination, hoping he didn't inhale something, the risk goes up. The good news is that very few people that are spreading the disease asymptomatically. So for a while they were saying you could be asymptomatic for a couple days and still spread the disease. That's true, it's still true, but it's a very, very small part of the cases. Because if you think about it, who are the people who are feeling the air droplets up that are getting most everybody? It's the person sneezing, coughing, runny nose, and all that. It does present just like the flu. You can't really tell the difference much. You get achy, febrile, maybe some sore muscles, maybe some cough, maybe a little shortness of breath, that kind of stuff. Headache. You're going to feel all the standard, which sounds all like the flu. So for the most part, though, people that spread it will have some symptoms, although you can spread it without symptoms. That's not the common way.
And it lives like 6 to 8 hours in the air. Is that it? Is that how long it lives outside the body?
So they've said that the longest duration they've documented on a surface is 24 hours. That's not common, but that's the longest. And probably, if you want to say maybe what's more realistic, probably 4 to 12 hours on a surface, and probably airborne, probably maybe more like 4 hours. Now, can it be longer? Absolutely. Because again, it's like those small little whiffy droplets that kind of, maybe you get a droplet and it's almost down in a little whiff like this and it goes back up, right?